What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raybon, and today I am joined once again by the odds maker, Sean Koerner, and we're going to discuss how to bet the NFL preseason with the Hall of Fame game getting underway Thursday, July 31st. It's going to kick off some real live football for us to finally bet on. That means tonight, as you're listening, we've got NFL football. Sean, what's going on?
What's up? Yeah, I love the preseason. I was so excited. We almost record a whole pod before this, you and I talking
Yeah.
about this Hall of Fame game. But yeah, I love preseason. It's one of my favorite times a year, and I love betting it. So yeah, can't wait to dive in on our approach to it.
Yeah, and full disclosure for everybody listening, like we just realized that we were on the exact same bet. And both wrote it up independently, did not know until we got on the pod. So if you saw two bets getting tracked at roughly the same time, that was not coordinated. We just both realized that we were on the same thing. So we will talk about how we got there and just more general evergreen tips so that you guys listening out there can kind of learn how to fish, so to speak, in terms of betting the NFL preseason. We do it a fair amount, especially Sean. I know, Sean, you've had like 30 bets a slate for preseason. So excited to jump in. And let's start at the top. When I say NFL preseason, I think that kind of comes with a reputation for being something that only degenerate bettors enjoy. Do you think that's kind of still the case, even with the kind of rise of sports betting? Do you think there are significant edges to betting the preseason, or is it more of a crapshoot? As I still see, I see a lot of people still saying that all around the internet. It's a crapshoot. But what do you think about that, Sean?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag of all of it. Of course, it's for degenerates like myself. We've been sitting here for months just waiting for the season to start. And granted, we still have a month until the regular season starts, but we have NFL players playing football tomorrow, and you could bet on it. So if you're still sitting on the sidelines, I don't know what to tell you. Now, it is kind of a crapshoot because, again, there's all these different rotations. We don't know what the coaches are doing. A lot of them don't take it seriously. So there's that aspect. But I've found, over the years, if you keep up on news and you approach it in a practical way, it's very profitable. You have to keep up with news. You have to kind of know what's going on. You can't just randomly bet it. But over the last four preseasons, I've been taking it a lot more seriously, having, you know, double digit bets every preseason. I've gone 61 and 35, so 64% on sides and totals over the last four preseasons. And the player prop hit rate's probably much higher. So there's clearly an edge there. And I think I'll dive into why that is, but it's something that I bet, pregame and especially in game, just the way preseason's set up.
Yeah, and I'll kind of run through a list of some of those, kind of things in news when you say news, things that you want to kind of keep in mind, and just general knowledge that I think helps with the preseason. So you definitely want to know your quarterbacks and generally your backup quarterbacks. You're not going to see much action for the starters unless there's maybe that those handful of teams that have an open competition and there's some young guys involved. College football knowledge helps because a lot of these guys playing are going to be either fresh out rookies, undrafted guys, or not. The last time they played extensively was back in the NCAA. So I think that really helps a lot. And then just that kind of obscure specific knowledge about guys further down on the depth chart. Period. We like to joke a lot about fullbacks and third string, fourth string wide receivers. But that kind of stuff actually helps a lot, being familiar with that already and kind of keeping an up-to-date depth chart and keeping tabs on that, I think is really important. And then also, I think one of the things that's interesting is you tend to see more betting trends with higher hit rates in the preseason because I think there's still the market really doesn't catch on to these trends. It's not as popular. So the books don't really have to adjust as much with some of these trends. Whereas in, the regular season, once a trend gets popular, the books are just going to adjust. Unless it's, maybe for a situation where people still aren't betting it because it's like an underdog spot that's hard to kind of get over and really bet. So I think that's interesting. And then line movement sometimes I think is a little bit more telling in the preseason. I'm not one that really ever cares about public percentages or whatnot, but I do kind of look at line movement in preseason because things happen so fast, and it could just be a signal that, oh, you missed some news, because these coaches are always kind of, just to your point, making it up as they go for the preseason. I remember, for the Hall of Fame game, Chargers Lions, Dan Campbell, I think it was Saturday, said all our rookies are going to play, and by Tuesday he's talking his first and second round pick are going to sit. So you really have to kind of keep up with information, and it comes at you super quick. What are you kind of looking for in terms of that news? Did I leave out anything that you kind of really pay attention to?
No, I'd say that, like you just said, it's very important to listen to what the coaches say, and understand each coach is different. Like Sean McVay doesn't take it seriously. He never plays starters. Last year, he was even in the announcer's booth. He wasn't even coaching. That's how little someone like Sean McVay cares about it. So I have a pretty good idea of like all the coaches, but my approach is really a bottom-up approach because I'm creating player projections that you can find at FantasyLabs.com that run our DFS models. So I'm projecting the rotations, the players themselves, kind of understanding who's playing on defense as well. So I have a pretty good idea of like who's in the game. And then from there, I think the most important thing, and you kind of touched on it, is the quarterbacks in the game, and the rotation. So what I do is I create quarterback charts where I estimate, when they're going to be in the game, and for how long. So that's why I really treat the game for all four separate quarters. So it's like four different games where you could have completely different matchups in each quarter. So that's why I tend to bet, first quarter, first half, or bet in game for the second half, things like that, because I'm projecting at a granular level. So I usually identify if it's a first unit playing a second unit or vice versa. That's how you kind of find your edges. And if the market's not really catching on to that, it's pretty obvious to see. So the other thing is, we were joking about Trey Lance before we came on. I think it's important to say that some of the quarterbacks like Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, yeah, they're bad regular season quarterbacks. But in the preseason, they're actually pretty good because if you think about the competition level, you have a lot of third string, fourth string quarterbacks that, are more practice squad guys, where someone like Mac Jones is actually really good. He had a really good preseason last year. So I think it's important to kind of just, evaluate the quarterbacks for who they're playing up against. So some of the guys that we make fun of and we wouldn't bet on in season are actually great in preseason. So at the end of the day, it just comes down to the quarterback and what unit of the offense versus what unit of the defense they're going to be playing up against.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. I think that's really the key. It's quarterback first, and then everything else that's around them. But you kind of got to know the quarterback, because just a different style of quarterback is going to kind of unlock some things that you may not be apparent otherwise. Like if you have a scrambling quarterback, that tends to help a lot in the preseason in a lot of these spots, because offensive line play is kind of deteriorated in the NFL over these last maybe 5-10 years. And so a lot of times if a team can't protect, they're not going to do much. Like they're not going to call many deep shots or anything like that. But if you got a guy that can move around, that can unlock some of that. So that could be really important. But I think ultimately we're kind of looking for, okay, what kind of news and information, is relevant, is actionable, and then, what kind is more surface level noise. I would say, as we've been alluding to, just trying to formulate an accurate depth chart. And when I say accurate depth chart, I mean not the depth chart that's the official team depth chart that gets published and tweeted out on X and whatnot, before the game. Teams have to come out with that. The NFL requires them to, and so they usually do it for PR. A lot of times you'll just see like them defer to veterans in those depth charts and whatnot. It's not necessarily exactly the rotation that guys will come in and out of the game. Sometimes it is. Some coaches are put more into it. Some coaches just kind of don't take it seriously, just like the games themselves. So you don't want to rely on that. You don't want to rely on your standard, you know, ESPN or national depth chart. Like there's a lot of different depth charts. None of them are really going to be accurate, as you're going to have to kind of look at it and say, okay, who in camp has been getting the first, second, and third team reps. I think that's a little bit more indicative if you could kind of parse that through some of the local beat reports. And then what are the coaches saying? A lot of times the coaches, because they're not really taking these things seriously, there'll be a lot more forthcoming with what their plans are for these games. Like I know for the Hall of Fame game, we had Harbaugh say, yeah, I just want to get Trey Lance game reps. So he's going to play the entire first half, going to play one drive in the third quarter, and we're going to go to ukulele. So there's you wouldn't get that level of kind of forthcoming from a guy like Harbaugh probably at any other point except the preseason. And then I think injuries, Sean, right, are important, and availability, because there's always going to be curveballs. It's harder to get accurate injury reports in the preseason. And then there's certain guys that just sit out, whether it be for rest or they're just, taking some PTO or whatnot. So I think those things are really important. And then I also tend to look at, position battles on the depth chart. I think, you can have a guy like, you could have like a kicker battle, for example. So if there are two kickers on the roster, that means you might get less going for it on fourth down, less go for two, things like that, because there's more kicks, and vice versa. If you have one kicker on the roster, that means his job is probably, cemented, and you might see a lot more of going for two. What other things are you kind of looking for, actionable things versus things that, maybe are kind of, ink is spilled on them, but they're a little bit less relevant for you personally?
So when it comes to like depth charts, let's say player props here. Again, I mentioned I attack player props as well. It's important to know, like, if a running back room has 6 active running backs and they're, the starter's going to play, it's going to be a very spread out carry distribution. So in that situation, typically you're going to want unders. It all depends, obviously. Whereas sometimes, they'll scratch a few running backs and you have just 2 to 3 running backs even available. So those are the spots, you got to find which back you think might get the most work. And then I go on his overs. It's a case by case basis, obviously, but paying attention to the depth chart and, who's even suiting up is huge when it comes to props for preseason. And then again, well, going back to coach speak, we already know Sean McVay doesn't take preseason seriously. He's never going to play starters. That's pretty much a given. Someone like Andy Reid, every year he says there's going to be a game where he's going to be like, yeah, we're going to play Mahomes like the first half. He's lying. What happens usually is he'll play Mahomes, and Mahomes will have a touchdown drive, and then they'll pull him.
One score.
Yeah,
one score.
One score. Usually, all it takes is one drive. So in those spots, I can. It's usually like week 2 of preseason. There was a year I took KC minus 1.5 in the first quarter, because you have to remember they're gonna, on this first drive, they're gonna be aggressive. They want to score a touchdown and get in the hell out of there. So I actually took Kansas City minus 1.5 for the first quarter. But as they were about to score, I was getting ready, and once they scored the touchdown, I then bet. I think it was the Cardinals. I then bet on the Cardinals for the rest of the half, and sure enough, they saw Mahomes, getting ready to get out of the game, and then the line just, you had a lot of steam coming in on the Cardinals. It was like the market believed Andy Reid that Mahomes is going to play deep into the second quarter, or at least first quarter. And it flipped. So just knowing those spots and knowing, again, when to come in with live bets is huge. But a lot of these starters, they'll be in there, try to get a touchdown drive, and they want to get them out. So betting, pregame and endgame, kind of knowing that in mind for some of these coaches, I think is huge for preseason betting.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that's the case, and one of the things that I really think goes overlooked in terms of information that, may be helpful, is offensive line, knowing the offensive lines, the quality, the depth, and the availability, because coaches are not going to put their any important quarterback, could even be the backup, much less the starter, in harm's way behind like a third string offensive line. So if you have the entire starting offensive line already out scratched, like don't bet on, like don't think the quarterback is going to be in for very long at all. And even if he is, he might not do anything, any deep drops, anything down the field. It might just all be underneath stuff because that's always going to be the priority, is not to get the quarterback blown up. Same thing with, what running backs are available, because they always talk about the protections. Like you can't get the quarterback blown up. So if there's no one, like if Mahomes is there and there's, but no one to protect for him, they're going to call certain types of plays and probably want to get him out of there a little quicker than they would if, they have their most trusted blocking back there. And so there's just these correlations that could kind of exist between, the certain players and groups of players that are available, to your point, when you're betting these props. I think other things I kind of look for, whether it's props, more so, going back to size or total, I think, teams with larger rookie draft classes, I think, are always interesting, because you're probably going to see more of them just by default. And so many rookies play in the preseason that it's better to have guys that are drafted than undrafted a lot of the time, because you're going up against so many undrafted guys. So like, I think the Niners this year are an example. Like they're going to have to play a lot of rookies, like because they're just on the roster. Like there's jobs up for grabs. So I think they're an interesting team. And then you also have teams that are just kind of consistently good in their roster and depth building during, the regular season. And for a few of those teams, it tends to bleed into the preseason. Like we've seen it with the Ravens. I think up until last year, they were on this crazy streak, but that's not really a coincidence. I mean, they're always very strong roster buildings, make great draft picks. And so there's depth further down the roster, and you end up having like legit veterans having to compete with very good rookies or even a good undrafted free agent class. I think the Vikings are also good with their undrafted guys. So just kind of knowing these teams, back to your point. And yeah, I think, the one other thing that we probably should talk about, preseason trends, like league average by week, right? Because, there's kind of different baselines for different weeks of the preseason. You tend to see lower scoring games, and then it builds up to whatever that dress rehearsal week is. It's kind of changed with the shifting schedules, but usually like Hall of Fame, you're going to see low scoring. Week 1, low scoring. Maybe now week 2 is kind of that dress rehearsal, so it kind of shoots up a little bit. And then week 3, goes back down again. But I think that's something you have to keep in mind. And then weather, it can kind of play a factor sometimes unexpectedly. I know I've found that, warmer games, you tend to see more overs and things like that. And you could see more rain and just weird stuff because it's still summer and hot and it's humid in certain spots. So those are some other things that we look for. But we're going to get into some of our favorite sources. But anything else to add as far as just like what's relevant, what's not relevant? I think for me, it's just like the buzz and the specific stats. Like he threw 5 interceptions already in camp in 10 days or something like that. That's just noise, probably going to be overly baked in. But anything you kind of look for or just avoid, and kind of try to shut out information wise.
Yeah, so going back to your great point about the offensive line play being bad, um, you know, especially the second half, the wide receivers aren't good. We're talking about fourth string practice squad guys. So I actually value rushing quarterbacks way more in those situations because, if the offensive line's bad, their pass catchers are bad, they can run it. And,
Yep.
scrambling is the highest EPA play. Usually it's a very productive play, but in the preseason, it's even more so. So if, I see a scrambling guy or running quarterback and he's facing a pocket passer that's, going to struggle with a bad offensive line, the receivers, aren't going to help him out. I'm going to go with the rushing quarterback there. That's why in years past, someone like DTR has been great in preseason, terrible in the regular season. Tyler Huntley has always been pretty good in preseason, part of why the Ravens have been successful. But I think just looking at quarterbacks that can run the ball is even more valuable when it comes to preseason. So that's like a sneaky angle that I'm looking at for most games.
And some teams make it a point to just roster similar quarterbacks. Like the Ravens, I thought have always done a good job of ever since they shifted that offense to suit Lamar Jackson back in 2019 when he took over, they pretty much only had mobile quarterbacks backing him up as well. So you can kind of depend on them. I think a team like the Colts a lot of years seem to have a lot of mobile quarterbacks backing, coming off the bench too. So there's just certain teams that kind of look for those types of quarterbacks. And I do think, I agree. I think those kind of teams have higher upside, and those kind of quarterbacks have higher upside. And so you got to be careful, if they can kind of lead these improbable comebacks, and or the kind of get a improbable over or something like that. So don't sleep on those those mobile quarterbacks in the second half. I totally agree. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much avoiding just again the camp buzz, like the overly granular information, or just like, he's making plays, all these beat reports, they're going to hype. Almost everybody's going to, by the time we play preseason games, most teams have had at least a week or two of camp, and then it kind of builds from there. So everyone's going to have had at least one or two good days. If they haven't, they'll probably play more. Like I remember Quentin Johnston was playing like the fourth quarter, and we went to a Chargers game at SoFi, and it was like, oh man, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good for him. So yeah, things like that. A lot of times you just want to kind of fade what the obvious reaction would be, because there's just not much to go off of information wise in the preseason. But we'll kind of get in what sources we're looking to. But I do want to remind everybody that NFL season is almost here, folks, and we have got some huge improvements and updates coming on the award-winning Action Network app. We're very excited to discuss in the weeks ahead, but to get the most out of the app, you still need to be an Action Pro subscriber. It's only with Action Pro that you'll get real-time pick alerts from myself, Sean Koerner, the entire Action Network squad. Plus, you can get access to the pro projections powered by Sean Koerner and our excellent predictive analytics team. Plus, you get a ton of other benefits as well. And right now, the Action Network podcast listeners can save $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. You just got to go to actionnetwork.com/pro. Use the code POD20, that's POD20, and you get $20 off a year-long subscription of Action Pro. That's actionnetwork.com/pro, and use code POD20, POD20, for $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. Let's save this money. All right, Sean, where are you looking for this information? Because we talked a lot about what kind of information we're looking for. Where are you getting it?
Yeah, so I think that something like The Athletic is great at reading, beat reporters, training camp notes, coaches' thoughts for the upcoming game. I get a lot of, news from there, days out from the games. But PFF has a ton of great preseason data that I leverage for my projections. But I think Twitter or X is still the best place to get it, especially leading up to kickoff. I think it's very important. Even just like a couple hours before kickoff, you get some crazy ass news for these preseason games because again, they don't matter. A lot of times they're just winging it. So I think like the best example of this was that game in Canada between the Packers and Raiders. I saw some buzz on Twitter. I was watching videos of the players warming up and whatnot. I think it was the only game that night. So, I had nothing better to do. I was watching pregame videos.
Remember this?
And they found like a hole in the end zone. It was like a pothole. So they're like, okay, we might have to just cancel the game. If we don't cancel it, what do we do? And I saw they were considering shortening the field to be like an 80-yard field with like cones out there. I said, "Oh, I gotta hammer the over because worst case scenario, the game gets canceled, I get my money back. Best case scenario, we now have an 80-yard field. Holy shit, like just do the math on that. The over's gonna cash." So I took the over, and then more and more people got news of this, and the total went up 5 or 6 points. And ended up clearing. They ended up playing on an 80-yard field, and it ended up clearing the number I got, but I think it finished under the closing number. So it was one of those times where you had to get the news fast and react fast. So that was Twitter. I owe it all to that. But there's other situations where, kicker can be hurt pregame and they decide they don't even have a kicker. So they're just going to go for two or go for it every time.
Actually,
But
no,
there's
that
all
was just
these.
the Giants all regular season last year. I feel like
Oh, well,
every
yeah.
time,
No, that one game.
and the
Yeah.
Titans the year before that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that
Sorry.
happens all the time in preseason, like just weird shit. And again, the teams don't really care, so they don't have a solution. But yeah, that 80-yard field was a great example of just being on top of news before everybody else can get to it. But those are like the three main sources that I use for preseason.
Yeah, and I think we should clarify that. Like when we say it doesn't matter, we mean it doesn't matter to the coaches in the
Win-loss
sense
bracket.
that yeah, exactly. Like win lose, but there are a select group of players that it matters immensely for, guys on the roster bubble
Yep.
that essentially are going to be made or broken by special teams. And so going back to kind of player props, when you have let's say the last running back spot, the last wide receiver spot or two, tight end, those skill position spots, and they're going to be special team spots, right? So what you tend to see in the preseason is that those guys will actually get extended looks on offense because there's only so many special team snaps, and they kind of know that that's what they're looking for anyway. But you got to see if they're active on game day and they do need to step up as that fourth or fifth receiver or third running back, that they can contribute on offense as well. So that's another thing I think to kind of look out for. And those are the players who it matters for. And that's why when we say like Sean McVay is just spending the afternoon in the booth and not actually coaching, it's because he's delegating to one of his position coaches that cares a lot more about these special teams guys on a roster bubble. And so if you can kind of identify those situations, it's another edge in terms of player props. But yeah, I think The Athletic, I think just because it's a subscription-based model, I think it helps a lot because like I saw something with, to use an example from this year's Hall of Fame game, I saw that Taylor Heineke, the Chargers' second string quarterback, he was going to sit as well or be the emergency quarterback. I saw that, a few days out, and I saw write-ups of the Hall of Fame game, betting advice write-ups of the Hall of Fame game that were essentially saying like, oh yeah, well, the Chargers have Taylor Heineke, so they have a better quarterback rotation. And it's like, so there can be a lot of misinformation out there. Things move quick, but a lot, especially in the preseason, we're kind of, one of the advantages of, people like Sean and I is not many people are, actually get to do this, and spend the amount of time on it that we do. So like we're in this bubble where it's like, oh yeah, obviously Taylor Heineke's out, but a lot of people, kind of do this as a hobby or like on the side, and there can be a lot of misinformation out there, especially now on the internet with just search changing and whatnot. So be sure to always kind of use sources that you can trust. I think that's why, like you said, X, for that up-to-date information is important as well. And then I think I love the Action app because I can see all the different preseason odds and lines and line movement at my fingertips, which, in the regular season, I think, there's a week between games and you can kind of get a sense of things if you're really paying attention. But in the preseason, things move so quick. There's games like 4 days a week that it's really valuable to just be able to see, all the different lines and games and how it's moving and like up to the minute. So the Action app in preseason I think is even more valuable for me and Bet Labs, because again, I think there are preseason trends that tend to kind of go overlooked and thus can be exploited because the books don't really adjust for them as much because it's just a more casual or it's just not as widely bet. So those are some things in addition to the PFFs that I look out, that I use. And I think, if you're looking to really kind of take it to the next level in the preseason, you got to kind of get some data together because again, there are these kind of trends and things like it's every week is almost its individual kind of sample. And but you can kind of glean a lot, and there's just not many great sources of preseason data out there. So being able to kind of, if you're really trying to create your own projections or kind of tweak ours or tweak Sean's, I should say, I think that's kind of, you got to make sure to kind of find some data for the preseason and look at each week and the trends. Cause again, scoring tends to go up, but it's not the same as like the averages per play, things like that aren't the same as the regular season. It's generally lower because you have lower skill levels. So a lot of kind of nuanced things going on with the preseason, but there's also, I think, one of the fun parts of preseason, Sean, that we talk about when we do our fantasy flex pods is that you learn so much. Like we have our priors, in terms of projecting the regular season, and we start to see just these rapid shifts in information and in outlooks for different players. So with that being said, what from a bigger picture perspective in the 2025 preseason, what are you looking out for?
I mean, really, just every game. I feel like every game there's going to be a fascinating storyline. But big picture, I would say, someone like Jackson Dart is someone I've been having trouble projecting how many games he'll play this year. I think ideally they want him to sit behind Russell Wilson as long as possible and learn because he's going to be a very raw passer. But if he shows out in preseason, I'm going to ramp up when I think Jackson Dart will start making starts. So that's going to be a player I'm going to be paying close attention to. I think the Browns quarterback battle is fascinating. You have four different guys capable of winning the week one starting job. So that's going to be fun to watch. And just in general, I always love watching rookies. So, Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton tomorrow night. Looks like he's going to play a drive or two. Trevion Henderson, Travis Hunter, getting possibly to see him play, wide receiver and cornerback next week. And, tight ends like Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren. It's just the first time we're going to see in-game action. So it's always fun to watch these games. And we're going to see some guys that we're not even considering that ball out in preseason. So I think people overlook how important preseason is. Obviously, we don't want to overreact to everything. But there's been numerous cases the past several years where I became higher or lower on a guy due to preseason, and it worked out for me. So that's one of my favorite things of preseason. It gives us some information on who to look out for this upcoming season.
Oh yeah, the minute we see Evan Ingram only playing third down and red zone because like Nate Adkins is getting the first team snaps, like you just got to know, know before it's too late. But I will say that I think it's been a long time since anybody but Sierra has wanted extra time with Russell Wilson. I don't think the Giants want Russell Wilson to be playing at all. I mean, have you seen this guy play over the last 4 years?
It's not good.
Not good. It's not good. And I mean, but they're desperate. Right? They do have Jameis Winston on the roster, so I get it. But I think Dart plays a lot more than people think. That's just my take on it. But I'm looking at that Indianapolis quarterback battle because I think it's fairly intriguing because you have Daniel Jones, who's terrible. You have Anthony Richardson, who's terrible but good in fantasy, and could be not terrible if he just ever got it together. And then you also have Riley Leonard, who might just not be much worse than those two guys. So I think that's just really intriguing for me. And then Cleveland, just kind of seeing how that all sorts itself out. I thought just this whole draft process was fascinating with the slide of Shedeur Sanders, and then all the off-season shenanigans, and you took another quarterback ahead of him, but you also got Flacco is still there. I mean, who would have thought in 2025 in the same division, we got a Joe Flacco competing for a starting job. I think, what is he, the favorite or something like that? Like it's pretty interesting. You got all the retreads, like you got Flacco, you got Pickett. So, I mean, to me, it's just the factory of sadness continues in Cleveland, but it's a fascinating car crash to kind of witness. I am looking at that Niners team, though. I think the Niners are a team that people might be sleeping on because there's just so much change, but you still got the key ingredients, which is Kyle Shanahan, a quarterback that he trusts, and a couple of elite guys on both sides of the ball. So if this draft class, which I get, it's a unknown. We don't know how it's going to be, but there's a lot of them. It's not like that year where they drafted like a kicker in the third round, and then I don't think they had more than like a few more picks rest of the draft. Like this could be a transformational draft class for them. So I'm really looking at that because I think San Francisco is kind of flying under the radar this year, and I feel like it's one of those years where they just go to the Super Bowl. And I think one more it's interesting to me, especially for fantasy, is Seattle. They've really prioritized speed, I think, on offense. And I thought, the Noah Fant release was interesting, but they got that young tight end Arroyo, and they drafted Milroe. So I'm kind of interested to see how that'll kind of works itself out in Seattle. That's a team I'm watching because I think it could be really bad in Seattle, but it could also be really interesting too, and just not bad at all. So I think that
that
range of outcomes.
Torrey Horton, their fifth round pick. I
Yeah.
mean, if Cooper Kupp is still looking washed like he was last year, he could be a starter. So he's someone, I'll be watching in preseason as well.
Yeah. A lot of new kind of faces that could become relevant quickly
Yep.
for the Seahawks. Preseason trends mentioned them, but things I kind of have seen tend to hit more often than the norm. Road teams tend to be profitable. I think that's just because in the preseason there's not much to go off of. So I think a lot of the market tends to overrate home field advantage a little bit. Where again, these teams they're not really going balls to the wall. So a lot of the home field advantage is not going to show itself because these teams are looking at specific plays or scenarios or things that are just going to kind of neutralize that. So we've seen, for example, according to Action Labs, road teams getting less than 35% of the bets in an interconference matchup, and that's just AFC versus NFC. That most preseason matchups are like that. I think just the lack of familiarity kind of plays into it, but we've seen those hit 67% since 2010. 37 tends to be a key number for preseason in terms of totals. Under 37 or more in outdoor games, which are again most games, hitting at a 61% clip since 2014, and then over 36 and a half or less outdoors is 58%, going all the way back to 07, 206, 148, and 4. So those are interesting. And again, just some more, I think playoff, non-playoff, which is a filter I rarely use in Action Labs, but in the preseason, I learned this from spring training in MLB, where I just had a huge edge just based on betting against teams like that made the playoffs and were getting overrated because there was no other info to go off of. And you see that play out in preseason a little bit too. When you see teams that made the playoffs, a lot of times people think that they aren't going to be as good in preseason because they didn't have as high of draft picks. So like overs are actually profitable for when both teams made the playoffs the year before. Overs have hit at a 60% clip going all the way back to 2005. And there's more trends like that. So I'll probably be betting some of them throughout the preseason. So be sure to follow me and Koerner as well on the Action app. But any trends you kind of pay attention to, or are you just strictly going off like your quarterback charts, or what are you looking out for in terms of like the general market, line movement, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm already kind of doing this at a granular level, so I don't really pay too much attention to trends. But like you said, the total, the key number is 37. I tend to bet halves at a time. Again, when you bet a whole game, it kind of dilutes. Sometimes you have an edge in the first half, and it goes the other way the second half. So I typically bet, first half, second half, and 17 and 20 are the key numbers, so it makes sense. The full game would be 37, but I'm typically paying attention to those numbers. Coaching against the spread records, you got to take them with a grain of salt, but when it comes to preseason, it does kind of tip off, which coaches take it seriously, which ones don't. So I think those are pretty important, in combination with my more formal approach. But the other thing it's not really a trend, but something that's been happening a lot more the past couple seasons is we have a lot more dual scrimmages between teams, and coaches are really considering that as preseason action. So if you have a dual scrimmage of two different teams, it's very likely that both coaches are going to probably sit their starters for that upcoming game, even if it's week 2 or week 1. Sometimes we see starters. I think it's important to kind of know where those scrimmages are, and just keep that in mind. But coaches have been basically treating that like the preseason games, so I've been paying attention to that. But yeah, in general, I'm just going with the flow with my projected, quarterback charts and things like that to kind of supplement with some of these other trends.
Yeah, the reason I do look at the trends, it's just more just trying to spot, uh, like spots where, I might have my handicap of a game and not see a big edge just based on,
Hmm.
who's playing and who's not. But sometimes the market can just get so out of whack based on these factors that don't really matter that you do end up having an edge. So I think that's why I
Yeah.
want to be at least aware of them. And also, one thing we should probably mention is that there's just tighter spreads and lower totals in the preseason. So
Hmm.
like when the market is off by a point or a half point and a half, it means a little bit or sometimes a lot more than it would in the regular season when the average total is 45 46. When it's down around 37 and most spreads are coming in inside of 3, like that edge to get it to 3 or to get it to a pick 'em or something like that, it can be massive. So that's why I've always kind of found it profitable to just be aware of what the market's doing, because there's just a lot of overreactions or reactions to irrelevant information, I think. So that's kind of how
Yeah.
I approach it. But
Yeah,
speaking
it
of,
also goes the other way. It
yeah,
just real quick, it also goes the other way where, John Harbaugh is really good in preseason. The Ravens won so many games in a row, where once everybody is now in on it and aware of it and betting accordingly, it can inflate the line the other way. So there were some
yeah.
games where the Ravens were favored by 6.5, and I had it like an even matchup, and it's like, okay, I got to take the points here. So sometimes it could go the other way. So you just got to be aware of what the market's actually aware of and not aware of. And when books are featuring Ravens bets, the book obviously wants action on it. So I think it's just being aware of just, what people know, what they don't know, and where the edge actually is, I think is very important.
You think we get a reset this year because they did go like
Yeah.
over last year, right? So maybe we
Yeah,
get
I
some
think
value because they got a pretty deep roster yet again.
exactly. I think, yeah, now that the market's kind of off that trend, if I think it's pretty even and the Ravens, the spread looks right, then I would consider them. But I take everything into consideration. Yeah, you're right. The market's probably going to be off that now. But Harbaugh, for whatever reason, has been taking preseason seriously. They have a ton. They have a ton of depth. So yeah, they're probably going to be a lot better this preseason.
Don't they have 2 kickers now? Don't they technically have a kicker
Yeah,
competition? Yeah. So
yeah. Loop.
they might take the
Well,
safe points.
yeah, well, they want to get Loop as much work as possible. I think they spent 6th round draft capital on him, so they want him to win the job. But again, they want him to get as much in-game action, having to deal with the stress of making a kick in-game as much as possible to get him ready for the season. So yeah, that's a good point.
I feel like kickers are like the reverse magnet. Like the more you chase kickers with draft capital, the worse they tend to be. I feel like
Yeah.
all the kickers that get drafted always have these just like, if not disastrous careers, at least disastrous stretches, like Moody. Who's the other guy? Who's the
Yeah.
guy for Tampa Bay? Was it is it
Guaya,
Arroyo? Aguayo. Yeah,
yeah.
like there's just so many of
Third
these.
they third
The
round pick on him.
the Patriots got, yeah, like they've just been when teams do that, I always kind of look at them a little side-eyed. Like I know what you were doing in theory, trying to, shore that
Yeah.
up and not have to pay like a veteran what you probably think is, more money than he's worth for a position that you don't think is that important. But I feel like it backfires so much. So that is actually pretty interesting. There you go. And that's going to do it for today's episode of the Action Network podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in. We're going to have so much more NFL betting content as the 2025 season approaches. So be sure you are subscribed so you do not miss an episode all preseason long. You can find Sean on X at _oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon. We're at those same handles on the free award winning Action Network app. And don't forget, you can use promo code POD20 to get $20 off a year of Action Pro. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pro. Enjoy the preseason. Enjoy the Hall of Fame game. Until next time, let's get this money.